You mentioned that Jack Kennedy had won the popular vote, but he had a Congress that was basically working to subvert things that he probably wanted to try to move into action in the country. That, to me, strikes somewhat of a similarity to the president that we have, who was won by a popular vote, but has a Congress that either doesn't want to move or is afraid to move to enact any progressive policies. Then we had a movement, a social movement, that was surrounding and putting oxygen into the air. Today, we don't have such a movement.
Right.
What's your personal reflections on, do you see any similarities in the circumstances?
Yes, many. And I see the beginnings of a social movement now around economic issues, and it's just going to grow, and it eventually will have political impact. And while some of the critiques of this social movement is that it doesn't have an agenda, it doesn't have a legislative program, that's not how protests start. Protests start against something that exists and says it has to change. It's not up to us to come up with a solution. We want you to come up with this is how strongly we feel, and it's going to grow and grow and grow. And it is. And it's this generation, this millennia generation, that's going to be the key in that. Because they see their futures affected. You see it in higher education. Higher education is being priced out for working class people. It's clear. Community colleges are picking up some of this slack, but colleges are now beginning to decide on admissions based on ability to pay. And so what's happening in the country is you're getting those who can afford it, it being all the good things so that we all identify with a middle class life, and those who cannot. And the society will not tolerate that over an extended period of time. It will not. It will not. So that's what I see coming. And I think that in terms of Upward Bound and Trio and Upward Bound will not exist 10 years from now, even 5 years from now, without that kind of social movement. The brief talk that I gave at the council in Washington was that it was on the 30th anniversary of Trio and Upward Bound and so on, actually of the council itself. And I said, if I was here 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I said the first lines I might have is Trio, Upward Bound, rest in peace. Because it won't be here 5 or 10 years from now unless there's a much broader social movement. And I think if you want to talk about maybe some of the things that you all can do that I think you can do, we can go there as well. But let me take another question. Yeah.
I think that's very important to talk about what we can do. But just going back in history a little, one of the striking things about that time, of course, was in addition to the Economic Opportunity Act and the Civil Rights Act, we had the Higher Education Act and the Elementary and Secondary School Act. And they were both critical in terms of college access issues. And I wondered if you could recall, how they tied together, and what did one, where they came from, what the relationships were.
Right. Well, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which something I was more familiar with, also would not have happened without this broad social movement. When I first came, actually before I came to Washington, while at Columbia, I was part of an oral history project that was started by Alan Nevins, who was looking at the New Deal, and I was studying part of the education parts of the New Deal. And my particular job was to interview a guy named John W. Studebaker, who was the longest-serving U.S. Commissioner of Education. He served between 1934 and 1948. And so Roosevelt creates the Civilian Conservation Corps, and he goes to Studebaker, and he says, okay, we're going to have this Civilian Conservation Corps. You're the Office of Education. I want you to develop the curriculum. And Studebaker says, no way. I'm not going to do that. It's not the role of the Federal Office of Education to do anything in curriculum. We're not about aiding education. We do studies. We report on the status of American education. And Roosevelt, arguably, most powerful presidents of the 20th century, went back to Studebaker over and over again, and Studebaker kept saying, no, no, no. When I came to Washington, there was a general understanding that there was a prohibition against federal aid to education. You could work around the edges, and that's why the education stuff that I drafted and participated in worked on preschool, after school, summer school. There's a reason why Head Start focused on that area, and Upward Bound focused on that area, right? We wanted to work around the public school system, in part because of our view of the public school system, that change wasn't going to come from there, and in part because there was this prohibition, legal and otherwise, against federal aid to education. So the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was a big breakthrough. Now, how did it break through? It identified low-income students as the recipients, not the schools, but the students. And so the schools were seen almost as flow-throughs. You know, school system, you identify the number of low-income students, the number of kids who qualify for reduced price lunches and free lunches, that came a bit later, and then we will give you aid for you to have programs for those particular students. So, and that's how that came about. The Higher Education Act had some of those same elements. It was Title III of the Higher Education Act, the Developing Institutions part, that was directly related to historically black colleges and universities and so on. So again, part of this social movement, this push, right, was there and so on.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about perceptions in the public discourse on their view of non-formal education in community education and how it's often seen as not as important as schooling, and if you've seen that change over the years?
Yeah, to some extent. The community education program during this time was considered adult basic education. I'll drift into another story that tells part of that. Again, some of it's in here. So I told you about this meeting in the White House, right? Farmer, King, and Whitney Young, and Roger Wilson. Okay. So Farmer calls me after the meeting and says, I want to meet with you and a couple of other people to see what we could do, because the president has formally asked me to submit something to him. And what are we going to do? And I have some ideas, and I hope you do too, and so on. So we have a meeting, a very small meeting, maybe 4 or 5 people. And remember, I'm the Director of Education Community Action Program. So at the meeting are 2 people who were very prominent in adult basic education, particularly then in what was called program learning. And what they came up with, and I had very little input, was something direct, because we had all these civil rights workers in the South and all over the country. And we said, well, why don't we propose, this would be Core's proposal, that these civil rights workers be trained to be community education teachers, adult basic education teachers, working with people in the South to get high school equivalency. Remember, this is still the South. This is still the idea, if not the poll tax of the literacy requirements. You could come in to a voting station, polling station in the South. You could have a doctorate. You could have anything. If the person behind the counter considered you illiterate or not sufficiently literate, you weren't on the voting rolls. So directly attacking that. And so they began to put together a proposal. I said from the very beginning I had to bow out, because that proposal would probably come to me eventually for review. And I had to recuse myself early on. And so the proposal gets written. It gets, Farmer sends it to President Johnson. Johnson sends it to Sergeant Shriver. And Shriver sends it to sort of where I am, but I'd already talked to my colleagues, and I said, you know, I'm not even going to look at it. It gets received as an outside peer review. It looks terrific. It goes back up the line to Shriver. Shriver sends it to Johnson, and nobody ever hears from it again. And years later, and we couldn't figure out why. And the most that I could tell is that chair of the most powerful committee for OEO was the House Education Labor Committee, and it was chaired by Adam Clayton Powell. And James Farmer was a registered voter in Adam Clayton's Powell district. And I was told informally by one of Powell's staffers that that had a lot to do with it. And anyway, that, again, kind of the crossroads of all of that. But that would have been a very important point, because people within the movement were waiting for what is the next step, and so on. And for many of them, this passage of the civil rights legislation was it. It was considered, once you have the legislation, and that was it, and the country would come around. Well, a lot of it didn't come around, and it needed a long time coming. But committee education stuff.
Have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Drew Goodwin. I'm the director of the Upward Bound program at Mount Wachusett Community College in Gardner. One of the real strengths of Upward Bound and TRIO programs in general, I think, is that they can be well tailored to the specific local environments that they're being held in. When the law and the vision of this program was drawn up, was that autonomy something that was aimed at fostering innovation, or was it really kind of the follow through of that prohibition on federal hands being put into education on the local scale? Or is it something else?
I think the flexibility and diversity of the offerings were very much part of it. And it was very hands-off. One of the things I did not want to do was to create an administrative structure to govern the program of federal civil servants, because I'd seen what happened to Head Start. And so the beginnings of Upward Bound were done by 3 staff people and a contract that we created to operate it. And part of that message was complete diversity. I'm just going to say something, if that's okay, answer your question. Say something on what I think you all could do, so in the short time. There are thousands and thousands of alumni of your programs. They have stories to tell. Upward Bound has obviously been very significant in their lives. You hear it all the time. You have something available to you that we never had. You have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have LinkedIn, you have Meetup, and so on. If I could say one thing to you, one message, is use your programs to go out and find the people who came through your programs. Get them to tell their stories, not just to you, but to each other. Treat them like alumni organizations. Who was in the class of 1998 at Salem State College, who was at Boston University, who was at MIT, and so on. It's not very expensive or difficult to do, and people will begin to identify other people and grow that up from the ground up. And this could be done all over the country. You don't need in Washington to create a membership. This is not a membership. This is an affiliation. This is an affinity group. And these are the people who eventually will help your program survive, because it's the strength of those stories. It's not the guidelines, it's not the money, it's the stories. Okay? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Segue, just in terms of alumni, because part of what Mr. Salett has done is create a legacy. When he first had the idea for Upward Bound, he probably didn't realize that it would sort of grow into what it is now. Well, I'm not sure if he did. So once Upward Bound was created, then other programs started. There was a student support service program, which works with college students at different colleges, and educational talent search, which works with middle school students on up to high school. So Upward Bound student support services, and talent search, those 3 programs is why how the term TRIO came about. The 3 programs then were formed, and then you had other programs years later, which helps adults, the Education Opportunity Centers. You have Veterans Upward Bound that works with soldiers who are returning from service. Upward Bound Math Science that was mentioned earlier, and also McNabb programs, which work with students who are in college to help them get terminal degrees and bachelor degrees. To get a sense of the tremendous impact that Mr. Salett has had on this legacy, we're going to show a brief video to give you a sense of and hear from some of the alumni who he talks about.
They are young and not so young. They are poor and not quite poor. They have known hard times and desperation. They know good times and have bright futures. They are the reasons for TRIO.
I grew up in the poorest section of a poor town.
I've been in 2 foster homes, 3 homeless shelters.
I was born in Celett, Guanajuato, Mexico, but I moved to the United States in 1989.
I grew up in a neighborhood which was one of the roughest areas in Chicago.
My mother left when I was 6 months old.
Neither of my parents went to college.
41 years of age. I have been married for 23 years. We have 8 children together.
When I talk about living in poverty, I talk about living in a home that had no bathroom, had no kitchen, had no running water, had no electricity.
Right out of high school, I joined the Montana Army National Guard. I went active duty Army for 3 years.
In our area, college was not an option because you can't afford it, and it's just so out of reach.
I have been in foster care for the majority of my life.
I am a sophomore at Waterloo East High School, raised by a single mom who's a drug dealer. Basically, school for me was a place where my mom sent her 4 children so that she could deal drugs during the day.
I was kicked out of the 7th grade because I had gotten involved in drugs.
My freshman year, 22% of the people who graduated went to college.
Veterans Upward Bound is a program they help you go from the military life into college.
I was a kid who got expelled from school for being a thief and an extortionist. You know, I was a kid who people wanted to see locked up.
College was never mentioned when I grew up.
The climate at that time was very rough. It was gangs, it was violence.
By age 11, I was sexually active, drinking and doing drugs myself. I looked about 14.
People in my neighborhood always told me, you'll be next. Next? Next to what? Next selling drugs, or next being the next person in jail?
My mother, our only source of income, became very ill, suffered from serious health problems, and had a major back surgery, which led to very serious complications.
We basically lived off of checks month to month from SSI and welfare.
When the steel mills left in the late 1960s, so did the hopes and dreams of many people in Aliquippa. Talent Search first came to Aliquippa in 1992, and I was one of the fortunate 20 students that were selected to be one of the initial participants.
The program has made a huge impact on me. They gave me that self-motivation and support that I needed, that I was lacking from my parents.
Within the first few weeks, my chemistry professor told me about the Student Support Services program, that they would help me as I struggled to adjust to my college-level courses.
It was one day I was in school. I heard students walking through the hallway saying, I'm going on a college tour. I'm going through college preparation. I'm like, ooh, I want to do that. I love to do that.
That same week that he was there, came to my home and talked to my father, and my father, I will never forget him looking at me and at Scott and saying, she's going to do this program because you can do what I couldn't do for her.
Even some of the social aspects of Upward Bound. You have lifelong friends. You meet them. You never know who you're sitting in the classroom with.
It's hard, It's frustrating. There is times where I was scared as an adult going back to college and never been there before. That's a big step. If it wasn't for EOC, I would not be there.
For me, Upper Bound was so much more than just a program that you go to on Saturdays. It was an opportunity for me to be encouraged, to be in a space where it was okay to be smart. It was okay to get good grades. It was okay to be encouraged and to encourage someone else.
My first semester in college, they tutored me through my Math 141 because I didn't even have a clue.
One day we went to a high university and we toured the campus, and I seen all these business opportunities, or all these opportunities I can make something of my life with.
What she showed me was that school should be my priority. She showed me something my foster parents couldn't give to me at that point, and that was encouragement, saying that I could make it. I would be the first person in my family to be able to graduate from college.
I had to work my hardest because everyone there pushed me and pushed me and pushed me. I almost cried because they pushed me so hard. And I hadn't felt anyone pushing me since my grandma had died. I thought that Upper Bound was my last hope, and they still are my hope.
I was the child that would have been left behind had it not been for the Upward Bound program. We need to have this program.
My graduating class this year almost has 80% of the people going to college, just with the help of the TRIO program.
Veterans Upward Bound helped me with my self-esteem. They helped me just feel good about myself.
I had gotten accepted to all the schools I applied to, and I was crying because I had to make a decision between Harvard College and University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. Who could imagine? Who could imagine?
Please, they make dreams come true no matter how old or how young you are.
I would not have been able to do what I'm doing if I didn't have the academics.
Mom, when are you going to be governor? And I say, oh boy, hon, I don't know, but if I don't make it, you will.
That program is my father.
I know I will achieve my goals because I have drive, desire, discipline, and I have all the resources SSS has provided for me.
Upward Bound basically turned the impossible into reality.
For many students in Aliquippa, TRIO is our lifeline to a better life.
It's hard to say that it sounds corny, but it all started with Mr. Stan Salett and other folks who cared about what was going on with the country. Before we move on to closing and move on to book signing, I want to make sure to recognize Stan Salett's wife, who's here, Liz Salett, who's joining us.
My
My name is Galen Hastings, and I have the honor of directing 2 Upward Bound programs. One is one in Worcester, Mass., and all our programming goes on at Clark University. I work for a nonprofit organization, Youth Opportunities Upheld Incorporated. It's kind of a little different type of setup. All our programming goes on at Clark. The second Upward Bound is in Southbridge. It's a smaller town and partnered with Nichols College. And I'm also past president of the Massachusetts Educational Opportunity Association, our state association, the advocacy umbrella for primarily the TRIO programs. And I have the privilege of saying just kind of the last bit of words to you. If you could join me, and actually, while I'm saying this, special thanks to Angela Quintadano, Patty Gregson, Christy Pierce, Wendy Portercost, Allison Cox, Drew Goodwin, Maria Puccio, Sarah Morrill, Charlie Desmond, Joan Becker, and everyone else who helped plan such an event. Thank you to Catherine Kennedy, Raul Fernandez, Logan Loom, and the entire staff at the Howard Thurman Center. Thank you to the BU School of Education, Instructional Media Center in Boston University Upward Bound. Finally, NEOA and MEOA and Boston University Upward Bound would like to present a small tokens of appreciation. Before I present them, I just want to say it's such an honor to have you here back in Boston. And certainly from my experience, TRIO Upward Bound is definitely, it's not just a job, it's a lifestyle, it's a choice of direction in your life because you feel passionate about helping low-income first generation students have better opportunities and have a better life, because that affects all of us. It affects the whole country. It's a trickle effect, and it's an honor to meet you for your progressive thinking, for your insight and your foresight, your brilliant idea of creating Upward Bound. Thank you so much, and here's a small token of appreciation from us. Mr. Salett will autograph some books. He has a few for sale. If you don't have your own copy, he can accept cash or checks. An ATM machine is on the first floor if you need one. Thank you for attending the special event. Please continue to enjoy desserts and conversation. Thank you.